Well, good evening, FBN. So good to be joining you now in the scriptures this evening, and we're going to jump into Proverbs chapter 6. And so, if you have a copy of the scriptures, would you join us there in Proverbs chapter 6? And I want to say a special thank you to my good friend and FBN Elder Paul Acey for covering for us last week, just with his perspective on those verses from verses 12 through 15, just his thoughts on just the wicked person. And love Paul's perspective on the scriptures. And we have so many good Bible teachers and good perspectives in our church. And so I'm glad that you were able to be blessed by that. And thank you so much, Paul, for sharing that with us. We're going to jump back in. We're going to look at those verses from last week just loosely because they fit so well into these verses that we're really focusing in on today, verses 16 through 19. So why don't we have a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into it, all right? Let's pray. Our God, we thank you so much for this time that we have together to come into the view of your word and to just submit ourselves to it and for you to just speak to us. God, to convict, to mold, to shape, to form us so that we wouldn't just be people who feel obliged to you or feel like we need to be religious to avoid some kind of pain or punishment, but God, that we would actually have it in our hearts to please you. To pursue you and to have a relationship with you that inspires how we live, that inspires how we engage with one another. God, lead us in this path. We'll use tonight to do so. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, I'm going to try to talk a little slower. I've noticed that I've just started wearing myself out by talking so fast, and so I'll try to make my pace a little more reasonable for people. But this was a while back. There was a movie that came out called Seven, and I don't know if anybody knew it, and I shouldn't have seen it, to be honest with you. I don't remember what the context was that I saw it, but I saw it way too young. It was one of those movies that it's kind of a crime thriller where you watch it once and that's enough. The storyline is pretty intriguing. And in this case, I think not Matt Damon, Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, they're all in it. It's a pretty all-star cast. And what it is basically a serial killer who is killing people according to the 7 deadly sins. So he uses the 7 deadly sins as his template for executing his murders. And so Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman are on, they're police officers, investigators who are trying to track down this killer. And it just got this bizarre ending, that's just, I'm not suggesting anybody watch it. But what I am saying is that this idea of 7 deadly sins has been popularized in our culture. People in the church or outside of the church typically know of the idea of the 7 deadly sins, and it was probably, I think it comes all the way back from a monk, back in the 4th century, and it was also popularized by Dante's Inferno, right? This mythological perception of hell, these like 7 to 9 different levels of hell, and different levels of hell where certain people who committed a certain crime or sin were judged and condemned for eternity. It's pretty interesting stuff. And so the 7 deadly sins that our culture popularly acknowledges, as you've probably known, are the 7 deadly sins of pride, envy, anger, slothfulness or laziness, greed, gluttony, and lust, right? And then I think there were some other religious people, who even added melancholy to the list. And so 8 deadly sins, really 7 deadly sins that have become popular in our culture. Well, you need to know that that's not in the Bible. That's not a biblical thing, though I think you can make a good biblical argument that all of those things are sinful and deadly spiritually, right? Pride, envy, anger, slothfulness, greed, gluttony, lust. The book of Proverbs has certainly a lot of wisdom speaking directly against each one of those things. But this idea of this bottled up 7 deadly sins in this form is not in the scriptures. Rather, what we have here in verses 16 through 19 is the more authentic 7 deadly sins, or as it says here, 7 things that are detestable to the Lord. He actually starts the verse 16 saying, the Lord hates 6 things. In fact, 7 are detestable to him, right? Hatred is a word that's synonymous with just how you might feel towards an enemy, right? And so these are things that people do that kind of that people do, and it resembles their sinful nature, their depraved nature. And the Bible tells us, that before we know God, we're actually enemies of God, even though we don't necessarily might believe that about ourselves. There are things that we do that he hates, and then he goes on to say 7 that are detestable. These things are an abomination. Again, strong language, but an abomination to his character, to the likeness that he has created us in, right? It's a total affront to what he intended in his just perfect creation of humanity, okay? And so let's look at the list here. This is the more authentic 7 deadly sins, and probably more appropriately so, the 7 detestable things that are an abomination to the Lord, okay? And so let's look at the first one. We'll take them piece by piece and then make just some closing remarks, all right? The first one, he says, starting in verse 16, the Lord hates 6 things. In fact, 7 are detestable to him. Arrogant eyes is the first one. Now, one of the things I want you to notice is just the symmetry between verses 16 through 19 and then the previous passage that Paul covered before, which was verses 12 through 15. In fact, what you see in 16 through 19 are the same things that you see in the previous verses. For example, the Lord finds detestable, arrogant eyes. Well, if you look back in verse 12 and 13, it says, a worthless person, a wicked man, goes around speaking dishonestly, winking his eyes, is what he says, signaling with his feet and gesturing with his fingers, always plotting evil with perversity in his heart, and he stirs up trouble. And the result is that there will be calamity that will strike him suddenly, and he will be shattered instantly beyond recovery. Okay. Now, in our passage, we see this idea of arrogant eyes, and the synonymous way of putting that back in verse 13 is the winking of his eyes. It's this proud haughtiness is one of the Bible words that's often used. It's arrogance. It's a proud look. It's winking, like, I got this, like, like I always think like I'm the man, you know what I mean? It's that kind of attitude that runs just so counter everything that the Lord embodied himself. Jesus was anything but arrogant, even though he had the fullness of arrogance that he could have displayed, and rightfully so, because he is creator God. This is not something that he ever intended for his people. Is a proudness of heart. And listen, if you're winking in pride, then you also have a heart that is prideful, okay? So the point here is not so much the eyes, but it's more the heart, right? The attitude. So he says, haughty eyes, it's an arrogance, okay? And it's detestable to the Lord. It does not reflect at all the likeness that he has and that he created us with. Second, he says, a lying tongue. A lying tongue, a deceitful tongue. Certainly speaking lies, speaking things that are not truth. Deceit is a very broad thing, though, right? There's plenty of ways to deceit by just softening the truth or just withholding the truth. Maybe you're not necessarily saying lies, but you are withholding truth so that people have a wrong perception of what's truly going on. That's also deceit. Right? So there's a big world there of deceit. By the way, if you look back at verse 12, a wicked man goes around speaking dishonestly. So you see he's on the same frame of thought here. Let's look at number 3. Number 3, it says that the Lord detests hands that shed innocent blood. Hands that shed innocent blood. And you're probably thinking, well, wow, that's not something I've ever done. I've never killed an innocent person or even harmed an innocent person to the point of shedding blood. But listen, we do at times, sometimes in the depravity of who we are, we can take advantage of the innocent people. Right? I mean, you talk about the most innocent is probably the unborn. right? And people seem to be able to shed that blood literally and all the time. And now more and more so people are championing that, right? And so we're going to be held to the same standard that it's talking about here. I think if you shed innocent blood, okay, that's bad. But if you champion other people who do the same thing, it's just as bad. It's just as bad. And so just because it seems big doesn't mean that it's not happening. And just because I've never particularly murdered someone myself doesn't mean that I don't have the capacity to harm an innocent person for my own good and for my own sake. Okay? So it is a part of our depraved nature, and it's something that is it's detestable to the Lord. Also, on that note, it's often preceded with gesturing fingers. Okay, that's kind of what he says back in verse 13. He's talking about this malicious man, and he winks with his eyes and signals with his feet and gestures with his fingers. People will tell you a lot of different things there. I mean, there's obviously gestures that you can make with your hands that signify anger and that I want to hurt you and I want to shed your innocent blood. But there's also another form of gesturing too, where I think, it's something that I kind of do with my kids sometimes out of kind of the fun, where like if we're having a pillow fight or something, I'll be like, come here, and then when they get close enough, I'll just throw a pillow at them, right? And so it's easy to deceive an innocent person because a lot of times innocence comes with naivety, and it's easy to play on that in order to get what you want. Listen, this happens in relationships all the time, right? Countless scenarios that you hear of young men and young women, and the young guy will play whatever card he needs to play, and he'll be a smoozer, and he'll be a smooth talker, and he'll do what he needs to do to, not even going to try, to the proverbial, right, gesturing of the fingers in order to take advantage of an innocent situation. Does that make sense? These things are out there. It doesn't look just like, somebody shedding innocent blood all the time, but people taking advantage of innocent people and even gesturing them or luring them into those situations because people are innocent and sometimes they don't know much better, and then by the end of it they're hurt and they're broken, and again, we have this in us. This is part of our depraved nature, and it's detestable to the Lord. Okay? The fourth on the list, he says, there's hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that plots wicked schemes. A heart that plots wicked schemes. Now, this is the heart that doesn't just do the stuff, but they actually plan it. You know what I mean? It's an intentional, willful part of them. It's the very opposite of innocence. It is a volitional, detestable act that knows exactly what it's doing, and yet it still does it. This is a marker of wickedness. It's shameless, right? It's kind of the idea of better to be a king in hell than a prince. Better to be a king in hell than a servant in heaven. And so they just think, well, I'm just going to be as bad as possible. And they're shameless about it, And that obviously is detestable. It's an abomination to the Lord. And it's reiterated in the previous verses where in verse 14 he says he always plots evil with perversity in his heart. Okay. That part reminds me of Genesis 6, right before the flood. And God looks at all creation, he looks at mankind, and he says that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all of the time, right? I think a lot of times we look back at that time and we think, well, why did God send the flood? And a part of our confusion about that is because we don't understand how depraved the world has been in the past, how depraved the world was then, right? If every inclination of the human heart is only evil all the time, then that's the worst it's been, right? Because that's not the case now. I know we keep saying, things are getting worse and worse, and to an extent that's true, but I don't think anything we've ever experienced or ever will experience was like that. where every inclination of the human heart was only evil all of the time, right? It's wickedness and it's an affront to God. And if it's that kind of abomination, and if it's flaunted before the Lord, why would you not expect a flood? Why would you expect anything else, right? Okay, the next one that he says, and he says, feet eager to run to evil. Not only are they volitional about this wickedness, but they have eager feet to do it. Not only do they plan it out, but they're excited about it. There's a pep in their step. You know what I'm saying? Again, this is kind of reiterated back in 13, where it talks about the signaling with his feet. You can always tell what a person's up to by watching their feet, right? Even if their mind and their mouth tells you, that they're not about something, their feet still end up taking them there. It just happens. It happens so often. People who say, well, yeah, I'm done with that, or I'm done with that, and yet somehow their feet still end up taking them right to that same detestable thing. It's one of those, the scary pieces of addiction. Is that there's a lot of detestable acts that people can get addicted to, and even if it's not necessarily willful, or they have it in their heads that they want to be done with it, it's like the whole of your body can be working against it, and yet there's still something. It's an eagerness in the feet. It's the same mentality of Lot's wife, who's running away from Sodom and Gomorrah as it's burning down, and yet she looks back at Sodom and Gomorrah, remembering, the days that were, and somewhat longing for what it was, and missing what it was. It's that same eagerness. It's that thing that seems to keep pulling you back, even though you're trying to get away from it. And so if you take this excitement, this eagerness, and match it with a volition of doing wicked things and of being a malicious person, why would we think that this would end in any other way than calamity? And as it says in verse 15, a sudden striking and an instant shattering beyond recovery. Why would we blame the Lord for his judgment upon these things, knowing full well that he's warned us against all of it? All right. Next on the list is what he calls a lying witness who gives false testimony. A lying witness who gives false testimony. Now, there is certainly a world of deceit that's referenced before, back in verse 17. Arrogant eyes, a lying tongue. I kind of see it this way, that lying tongue that he's talking about back in verse 17 is this idea of, deceiving for selfish gain. You know what I mean? Why else do you lie, or do you be deceitful unless to somehow get something for you, whether it's to escape some kind of punishment or it's just to get what you want. But here he says a lying witness who gives false testimony, right? This is probably still for selfish gain, but it's also at the great cost of another person. It's at the expense of another person. It's not only to get selfish gain in a dishonest way, but it's also hurting another person. Anytime you give a lying witness and give false testimony, it hurts. I heard a story not that long ago of a man, a Christian man who was charged with I think there's a serial raping situation, and this man was charged to multiple life sentences because he was falsely identified as the culprit. And so he went to prison, and he was there for probably 7 to 9 years, somewhere in there. And his son the whole time just kind of knew that his dad was innocent. And so his son was one of the ones who was just pushing for, DNA testing and all that kind of stuff. And eventually this man was proven innocent and he was released from jail. But listen, he lost 7 to 9 years of his life in prison because someone else falsely accused him of something that he didn't do. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just there's so much loss and so much pain and hurt at another person, right? Because the truth wasn't told. Man, that's tough, right? Last on the list, he says this, and one who stirs up trouble among brothers. It's this idea of discord, and it runs directly against the New Testament's call for all of us to be unified right? Discord just becomes very easy for a lot of people. Argumentative, very opinionated, defensive. They're hard to get along with, and if you just look, again, social media and a lot of our cultural topics and political, just culture and climate, gosh, it just feeds this discord between people. And I think God just looks at just the chaos of just all of the discord between political parties and racial stuff. And I think he just looks at all of it, and in a sense, he hates it. I really think that he hates it. I don't think he likes it at all when believers choose a political side and get very, very angry and heated and frustrated and belligerent about it, and without any biblical basis, without any Christ-like gentleness and humility. I think God looks at that, and I think he hates it. And it's sad because I think a lot of people get that way in their staunch political stance or whatever it is, and they think that they're honoring God in that way. Oh man, if it's sowing discord, then more than likely it's something that he's not a huge fan of, and we need to guard ourselves from it. I think it's okay to stand firm in what we believe is truth according to the scriptures. I was so discouraged the other day. I heard it was a radio show, and a guy I kind of respect was talking about, just his discomfort with the political climate and everything, and just talking about the Constitution, He kept talking about the main thing, the main problem is that people just aren't listening to the original points made in the Constitution, right? It's all about just amending what was once there instead of trying to fit what is the Constitution. And so, he basically said something along the lines of, in America we have two things that should guide us: the Constitution and the Bible. And in my head I was just like, oh my, you can't even put those things on the same level. Why in the world would someone say that? Constitution aside, and listen, I'm a fan of our country and I'm a fan of the Constitution. It doesn't even scratch the surface of what the Bible should mean for us, right? And if you're in a place where it's the Constitution and the Bible are on level ground, then my gosh, there's some correction that's needed there, okay? I think most people would agree with me on that because we're talking about the Holy Bible written by God, and we're talking about the Constitution. Clearly, there's a difference there, but I think deep down there's a lot of people who still live that way, right? You live by both, and that's just not what we've been called to do. Again, I love our country. I love just the truth and the call to equality in the Constitution. It's not scriptures. It's just not the Holy Bible, and we can't even put those things in the same boat. So, that's a lot there, right? First thing I want to say is this is not a comprehensive list. The Bible's pretty clear. God hates a lot more things than just this, right? He hates idolatry. He hates divorce. He hates, all of these things. I think in each and every place of hatred, there's always redemption in the hope and grace of Jesus Christ. Anything that he detests, he also provides a way of redemption for in Jesus Christ. And so we always have that promise. But listen, this isn't a comprehensive list. What this is a list of things that mark our depravity and things that we should avoid, because it's not the likeness that we've been created in. It's a depraved way of living. It's not how he created us. And that ultimately is why it's a detest to him. It's not us necessarily, to an extent anyways. It is the depraved plague of sin that has marked us, that is such an affront to him. But it's not without hope. Right? Jesus Christ, like I said, there is nothing that God detests that he also hasn't answered with the hope of redemption in Jesus Christ. And so I think for us, I don't think we should read this list and immediately be stricken by fear and just think, well, how do I avoid this, right? How do I avoid these things? I don't want to detest God. And I think what can accidentally happen is if we get into that avoidance mentality, then all of a sudden the emphasis just gets on self. Well, I want to do what God asked me to do so that I'm not on the detestable side of things, setting myself up for, verse 15, calamity, that I'll be stricken and that I will be shattered beyond recovery. I don't want that for me, so I need to avoid that, right? And I think, there might be some truth in that, of course. It's okay to not want to be on God's bad side and to not want to go to hell. It's okay to not want these things, the consequence of sin. But if that's our pure motivation, then we're missing out on something, okay? Because the question isn't, how do I avoid consequence? The question isn't about me and self-preservation. The question should be, how do I live in a way that pleases God? How do I live in a way that pleases God? Because when we ask that question, it removes the risk of what we see here in Proverbs 6 altogether. If the question you're living by is, how do I please God? Then you don't need to worry about doing things that are detestable to Him. You don't need to worry about that, because that's not what you're trying to avoid. What you're trying to do is please Him. Right? And so the self-preservative thought of, I just need to avoid these things, turns into a God-glorifying, God-focused thought and emphasis. How can I please Him? The focus is on Him, not me. And whenever I put my focus on Him, that's actually far more preservative for me than anything I could provide for myself. Does that make sense? Self-preservation is religion, right? Well, I need to do the 10 Commandments, and I need to go to church every Sunday, and I need to watch what I say, because I don't want God to think less of me. I don't want my reputation to be hurt. I don't want God to smite me. I don't want to risk hell. I want my family to be a good family, and so I need to preserve me and mine by doing all of the right things. But listen, that's good to an extent, but where's the relationship? If your whole life is built upon just avoiding the consequences of sin, and you're not ever intentionally thinking about, well, does this please God? It's a different way of thinking. One promotes religion, the other promotes a relationship. I mean, it's the same way in any relationship, right? Self-preservation is a marker of religion. Self-sacrifice is a marker of true relationship, where I say, my will is not the main will. My desire is not the main desire. His desire, His will, that's the main thing. And I give myself up to achieve that, knowing that if I do that, He's going to take care of me better than anything I could ever do for myself. Right? It's the same thing in any relationship, including marriage. Right? I could, on anniversary, go pick up flowers with the understanding that, gosh, I really don't want, Kenzie to get mad at me this time. I want us to have a good night for once. And I just want to avoid all of the consequences of looking like I was inconsiderate. So I'll buy flowers just to spare us all a night of misery, right? Versus, she would really love these lilies tonight, and I'm going to go get them for her because she would really like it. And I want her to know that I love her and that I actually care about what she likes. I mean, it's a difference. Sometimes it looks the exact same, and honestly, I could be in both mentalities and still pull it off to where it looks the same to her. But for me, right, it's different. And what the Lord wants of us is not, I can do all this just so He and I are good, and so my life doesn't get ruined somehow, or that He doesn't feel like He needs to correct me or judge me somehow because. So I'll do it and I'll abide by everything He says, versus, man, Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I want to live to please Him. I want to live in a way that pleases Him, so He knows that I love Him and that I care about what He has called me to. Okay, I hope you see the difference there. And so listen, I want to give you a little formula that could help with this when it comes to just living to please God. Okay, I got my Bible passages up on my computer screen, so I'm going to use this to kind of read those. But it all starts in Romans 12. And so what I want to give you is 3 words, and we'll do this quickly. The 3 words are this: alignment, attitude, and actions. Okay, alignment, attitude, and actions. And you can kind of think of it as a bullseye, right? So if you had a big circle and then an inner circle and then the bullseye, this bullseye would be alignment, right? This is the centerpiece. And Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God." Right? Self-sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is our desire. And he says, "This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God." Listen, this is alignment. By alignment, I mean at our most core level, we have the utmost desire to please God. And when we do, it inspires us to self-sacrifice, where we give up of our will, we give up of our overwhelming desires, and we live holy and pleasing to him so that we can know his perfect will, and we trust that when we do this, he's going to supply everything we need. That needs to be our core. That needs to be the main part of our days. That needs to be our identity in pleasing God, right? That's the center of the circle. And then right outside of that is this word attitude. If we are aligned with the Lord in this way, then that will guide our attitudes. And there is no better passage about attitude than what we see in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, that says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others. Adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus." And then it goes on to explain how Jesus was king and creator, and he gave it all up to come as a baby infant. And then he did it and died on the cross for our sins when he was a 33-year-old man. And in that wretched death, right, he was glorified and honored. And it says, let us have the same humility, where even though Jesus, being above everything, submitted himself to being below us to consider others better than ourselves, and let that guide our attitudes, right? Humility is a big piece of everything he's talking about here. Arrogant eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, right? All of it comes from an arrogant and proud heart. An attitude is what we need to have corrected. But again, it starts with alignment. Alignment and then attitude. And if our alignment is about pleasing the Lord, and our attitude is cultivated in humility because we desire to please the Lord and give up of ourselves so that we can live to please him, then that will dictate our actions, which is that outer circle. James chapter 2, verse 26 says, just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. Right? Faith without works. Luke chapter 6, verse 45, a good person produces good out of the good stored up in his heart. Right? And so if you have your alignment, which is a heart issue, it's pleasing God and letting that be the main desire. That dictates your attitude of humility, and that dictates your actions of living for him, right? Where you're not lying, and you're not trying to shed innocent blood, and you're not trying to plot evil. Your actions are dictated by your humble attitude that is inspired by your heart to please the Lord in all things. Okay. If we can get our mind on pleasing God instead of just avoiding the consequences of sin, right? Then what we'll find is that we can please God, and by doing that, the natural byproduct of that is that we will avoid the consequences of sin. It's all good. That's all good. But it's not a true relationship if our only point in the relationship is to avoid any consequence. Relationship is built on a genuine love that desires to give up of self to please the other party. Right? Because we love them and we cherish them and we understand that we are nothing without them. Right? And Jesus Christ has done more for us than anybody could ever possibly do. And so is he not worth your genuine relationship built upon wanting to please him? Because he has so pleased us with his salvation to us. Listen, wherever you're at in this list, as we've said over and over again, there is nothing that God calls detestable that he also hasn't answered with Jesus Christ, with the hope of redemption. And so if you've crossed any of these lines or whatever, listen, the hope in Jesus Christ, it trumps all of this stuff, okay? So he's your answer. But the question I want for you, to end our time with is simply this. Has our relationship with the Lord been about self-preservation? Really just trying to, to save face, to save reputation, to avoid any, sovereign consequence, and to spare, family drama? I mean, is it all about self-preservation, or has your pursuit of the Lord truly and genuinely be about what's pleasing to him? And when we do that, when we get our minds off of self-preservation and more about glorification to God, then listen, preservation will be there, but it'll be his preservation to us, which will be so much better than anything we could provide for ourselves. And we can trust him with that. And I think he's proven himself to us that he is trustworthy in that. So listen, that's what I want to leave you with this evening. I hope that's meaningful to you. I'm challenged by it. And, right, your alignment. Are you pleasing to the Lord? Let that dictate your attitude of humility, and then let that dictate your actions of kindness and goodness and character and fruits of the Spirit and all of the things that are pleasing to the Lord. Man, I want to be that, and I hope you want to be that as well. I love you guys. Grateful for your time this evening, and I pray that Proverbs 6 has been a helpful piece of Bible study for you this evening. Love you guys. We'll see you this weekend.